Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new ProRevenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "Their landlord expected them to pay for the damage after a hurricane." I lived briefly in Florida about a decade ago, which is where I met my partner. It wasn't long after we met that we moved in together due to my not-so-great living situation, renting a room from a friend who was so addicted to opioids she could barely function, and her enabler husband. We found a nice little two-bedroom house that was owned by an elderly couple that lived just a few blocks away. Everything was okay. We did find cockroaches after we moved in, which was quite shocking as I am extremely clean and had never had roaches before, and when we told the landlords they told us they were not roaches but palmetto bugs, FYI they are the same thing, and refused to have an exterminator come in. Bad sign number 1. Then a hurricane blew in. This was Florida after all. It was only a Cat 1 or Cat 2, I don't really remember, but there was substantial damage to the roof and a lot of water had gotten in. Being northerners, we had no real idea how to prepare properly, and the landlords just told us to lower the hurricane shutters, so that is all we did. It wasn't long after we had mold growing on our walls, especially in the laundry room. Reported it to the landlords and they told us to just wash it down with bleach water. So we did, and it came right back, so it was a constant cleaning process. When we complained, we were told that was what life in Florida was like. They also came and took a look at the roof from the yard and told us, "You two are strapping young men, you can go up there and fix it, just let us know when you're done." Yeah, no. Then another hurricane blew through, again only a Cat 1 or 2. But this time we had windows broken during the storm, and since our roof was still not repaired or even tamped from the last storm, our carpets and furniture were soaked. Here comes the black mold again, but this time not only on our walls but on our carpets and furniture too. I spent the days outside with our dog and we were sleeping in my partner's office. Our landlords again told us to just clean it up with bleach water and that the damage was our fault since we didn't prepare well and hadn't fixed the roof ourselves. So we called the city and had an inspector come by. He walked in and balked at what he found. Black mold all over the carpets and walls. The roach population had a little boom, and he could tell while looking at the roof that it was in need of repair prior to the storm. And it still hadn't been tamped. The best part is, when I was standing at our open door with the inspector just inside, the old man came walking up talking about how we better have repaired the roof and how they were gonna charge us for all repairs and carpet replacements and mold removal, yada yada yada. Cue the city worker who came around the corner and asked him if he was the owner. He said yes, and the inspector told him he was condemning the house because it was not habitable and that it was not our responsibility as tenants to make or pay for the repairs. He also recommended that we should be released from the lease. Never seen an old man wobble away so fast. Later that night his wife called raising high holy hell about how she was suing us for damages, how we were not getting any money back, blah blah blah. She also said she had removed the condemned danger signage that was placed on the door because it was embarrassing, people knew it was their property. But she made a mistake. She wrote us strongly worded letters about how we were taking advantage of the elderly, how all the damages were our fault since we didn't do any repairs, how she would not release us from the lease, and how many lawsuits she was going to hit us with. After contacting the inspector who saw our house, who took another trip to the house to replace the signage, we turned all of this in. He laughed and sighed and said he knew exactly how to handle it since he saw this all the time after hurricanes, and if they actually sued, he would testify in our favor since what they were doing was highly illegal. He then told us he was going to pay them a little visit and make sure the letters got into the hands of the right people, as well as how he had to replace the signs, another thing she admitted in the letters. About a week later, we got a really pleasant call from the landlady saying we were such wonderful tenants and how she was refunding our security deposit. And how she was graciously going to let us out of the lease and not pursue any charges or the rent for the last few months, which we had refused to pay since we could not live there. And if we needed help finding a new place to let her know, and she would refer us to some of her friends who owned property too. Lol nope. We did learn, because we were watching the situation, that the house had to be gutted and completely remodeled. We actually parked up the road with some takeout and watched a crew haul out sheetrock and carpet. They could have saved themselves thousands if they had just called a roofer and someone to clean up the mold instead of making us call the city and have the house condemned and then do whatever they did to make them change their minds on everything else. Still, I wish I could have been there when they were confronted by inspectors the second time. The first was glorious. The next one is titled, Sell the Discounted House I Gave You. Bring in the hogs. So one of my brothers is adopted and is amazing. He didn't get anything handed to him in life and he's seriously one of the hardest working people I know. Just as he was starting his own family, he had even more financial burden due to some medical problems. Still, somehow he managed to build half a house on some land my dad sold him. He used the equity in that to get a second loan and finish it, and he had to fight the bank for that even. Time goes on and he begins to do really well, so he sells the first house he built at a profit and buys some land. Like, 175 acres in the Midwest. He lives in a rural area. He likes to hunt and does some farming on the land, but the house that was there when he bought it isn't ideal, despite some major improvements and renovation. So he builds the third house and puts the house up for sale. He keeps the land around the house for hunting. This is important later. This is when one of his envious family members asks if he and his wife would consider selling them the house. They can only qualify for something like half of what it's worth, but my brother is a fairly generous guy. He agrees to sell the house to them at a rather hefty discount since they're family. I'm sure he felt some of their pain as well. He'd had his own difficulty back when he was starting out. The bank agrees to loan them the money. They can't go wrong. It's for way less than the property is worth, and the deal is done. A few short months go by. He's driving by the property and spots a for sale sign. He stops in and the husband explains that there were some things about the house they weren't happy with, so they were planning on selling it and buying a house more in town or something, etc. My brother explains that they got a sweet deal only because they were family and that he'd appreciate them selling the house back to him for what he sold it to them for. The husband basically closes the door on that, and my brother leaves. And he thinks about it. I'm 100% certain that the family members understood that they were getting a good deal because they were family, and he was happier selling it to them with the understanding that they weren't to take advantage of his good graces. This is a guy, by the way, who manages big projects. He's a really fair guy. The stuff he does in construction, probably half of you have driven over, big bridges that go over rivers like the Mississippi for example. He's used to solving hard problems. This one isn't that hard. The next day he drives out with some fence in the back of his truck, and the family members in the house wake up to some fence posts being driven into the ground. The husband comes out. "What's going on?" he asks. "I'm just putting up some hog fence on my property." "Don't worry, it's all on my land. I'll just go around your house here and put a gate in so you can get in and out." The husband is a bit perplexed. "You're bringing in pigs?" And my brother was seriously set to do it too. He had about 100 lined up from a farmer down the road. The husband goes back into the house. A few minutes of discussion occur. The next day they all meet at the bank and the deed is transferred back to my brother. And he didn't even have to deploy the hogs. The next one is titled, Her Colleague Didn't Read the Handbook, for 9 years. I used to work in an office. What kind of work isn't particularly important to the story, so just picture a basic office job. Every January, HR would send an email to all employees with the employee handbook. This included job descriptions, office policies, etc. Every year since the PDF handbook had been established, it would be named with the year following it to establish it was different than the original and all other years. Any changes would have updated next to the section in the table of contents so you could see what had changed from the previous year and familiarize yourself with anything new. Now with that background, we will introduce Karen. Karen had been with the company a pretty long time, about 10 years I believe. She was fine at her job. Just fine. She would get things done, but not without making everyone else miserable in the process. She would ask questions that had already been answered, and basically just waste everyone's time for fun. She was just plain nasty to people and tried as hard as she could to make everyone stay far away from her. The worst thing about her was she always seemed to be looking for a fight or looking for a reason to complain. She had threatened lawsuits a few times over any small thing, but would always just get over it and drop it because she knew no laws had been broken and it would never go anywhere. She'd comment on how she should sue basically every business she ever went to because she could live off the settlement and retire early. Over the smallest issues, you can imagine. She did her job and we never had a valid reason to fire her, especially knowing how lawsuit happy she was, so she stayed. Karen's job description, as per the handbook, called for a bachelor's degree. Karen did not have a bachelor's degree but had been hired prior to that being a requirement, so she was grandfathered in. One day, a position above hers became open. A guy who we will call Terry had recently completed his master's degree after taking night classes for a few years, and since an internal promotion is typically better than an outside hire, he was chosen for the promotion. Terry had been at the company for about 4.5 years and was well liked and great at his job. The new job required a master's degree in its job description, and him being a recent grad, it was a perfect fit and everyone was happy for him. Everyone but Karen. Since she was constantly looking for something to sue about, she took it as a direct insult that she had not been considered for this promotion that she was not at all qualified for. She immediately cried discrimination and told our boss her lawyer would be in touch. We were all perplexed since it was very clear that this position required a master's degree, and given that she didn't even have a bachelor's degree, there is no way she could have been hired for the role. What we soon realized was that Karen had saved the original company handbook named Company Handbook and had not bothered to open or save any new editions that were sent in the following 8 years. She just assumed no changes had been made and that it was just sent every year to ensure all employees had it. If she has bothered to open the file, she would have seen the sections that say updated in the table of contents. Since Karen cried lawsuit a lot, no one expected much of this since it was ridiculous to claim. But sure enough, Karen gives her resignation letter via email, and it is scathing about how she can't bear to work in such a discriminatory environment that would only promote men. When any higher-ups try to speak to her about this and clear up the confusion, she basically tells them to duck off and to read the damn email. I don't owe any more of an explanation. She basically goes full Karen. Not long after, a letter comes in from her lawyer asking for a settlement to avoid a discrimination case. What Karen hadn't realized was that our boss's sister-in-law owned a law firm. She didn't really take on clients herself anymore and mostly just managed the other lawyers of her firm. She was basically semi-retired. What this meant was she had plenty of time to review any letters from Karen's lawyer and advise us. Since Karen didn't bother to read any of the updated handbooks, she was unaware that this position had required a master's degree for many years now, I believe about 6 years. She supplied her lawyer with the original company handbook from 9 years ago, and he used that as a reference in his settlement demand. This was when we realized she hadn't read any new handbooks in years. Since Karen rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, boss's sister-in-law decided to personally take on the case. Every letter Karen's lawyer sent, she sent back 1-3 times in length. Some of it wouldn't even really say anything, just wordiness, but it would certainly take Karen's lawyer a while to read it, and he did not come cheap. After several of these letters, they realize no settlement is going to happen. They want to take it to court. It's a pretty cut and dry case. Boss's sister-in-law shows evidence that Karen has received all updates via email. After the change was made and the handbook sent out, HR even sent an email to Karen specifically letting her know that she was grandfathered in and doesn't need to worry, to which Karen replied, "Okay, thank you," confirming receipt of it. The best part was when boss's sister-in-law said that they couldn't break company rules to give Karen a job she was totally unqualified for while neglecting another employee who went above and beyond to get his master's degree to advance, as that would be unfair to all other employees. Karen now had a seriously huge bill from her lawyer for all of these letters and filing the case, etc. No job, no one she could list as a positive recommendation, and no degree. In the time she had been at the company, it had become an industry standard to require a bachelor's degree, so she was effectively shut out of her career. It would also be hard to explain how you worked somewhere for a decade and don't have a letter of recommendation from anyone there. If she had only read her damn emails. The last one is titled, "They Figured Out a Foolproof Way to Get Back at the Mean Neighbor." This happened a few years ago when I was in high school. My school had an after-class sports training which was open for whatever student wanted to come, except the training was 3 hours after all classes ended, and since we weren't allowed to stay, we had to go home and come back before the training started. As a result, the students that attended had to wait outside when they arrive until the school gate opened, so we would usually sit on the sidewalk and talk while we waited. That is when the problem started. A very petty woman lived across the street from the school, let's call her Mary. Mary did not like us sitting on the sidewalk, so she would shout at us and insult us even though we weren't doing anything. We mostly didn't care and just ignored her. On a very hot day, the sun made the concrete in front of the school too hot to sit on, so we all sat on the other side of the street, right in front of Mary's house. Not even 2 minutes later, Mary was screaming at us to get out of her sidewalk. When we refused, she went back inside her house. The next thing I felt was my back getting wet, followed by my friends screaming. Mary had poured cold water on us from her window. We were very upset because not only we weren't able to train while soaking wet, my friend's phone was in her hand got destroyed because of the water. We screamed every curse word existent at her until our coach arrived and told us to stop. We explained to him what happened and he said that he would talk to the principal about it. We knew that probably nothing would happen to her, so we decided to take it into our own hands. We thought a lot about how to get revenge, but since doing something illegal would get us expelled and possibly arrested, we had to be smart about this. My friend noticed that Mary's sidewalk was very narrow, and since a year back we did a lot of research about wheelchair accessibility, we knew that it was against the law. That is when the revenge comes in. Before starting, we measured Mary's sidewalk and it was about 0.9 meters. The minimum by law was 1.5 meters. Perfect. With that knowledge, my friend and I went to the Department of Infrastructure in town and reported Mary's house. Just to be sure, we asked what exactly would happen if she was breaking the law. The penalty was $500 per square meter not in compliance per month, counting the day she was notified. The penalty would double after 12 months. Since the government doesn't lose an opportunity to make money, we knew that all we had to do now was wait. Just for fun, we also measured the length of the house and it was about 5 meters. We did the math and it would cost her about $1,500 every single month until she took the entire front of her house down and rebuilt it further back, which would also be very expensive. Lo and behold, 3 months later there were workers destroying the front of the house. The best part is that she has no idea of who it was.